Girl decides to run away after meeting a mysterious man at the ice cream shop 4 days ago. When they discover the reason, everyone is stunned. Sarah Matthews stared out the window of her second-floor bedroom, watching the world go by without her. At 16, she felt like a ghost in her own life, invisible to those who should have seen her most clearly. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway barely registered. Her parents were home, but it made little difference to her day. She turned back to her desk, littered with half-finished homework and doodles in the margins of her notebooks. The house below came alive with the sounds of her parents' arrival, muffled voices discussing work, the clink of keys tossed onto the kitchen counter, the hum of the refrigerator opening and closing. Sarah didn't move to greet them. "I might as well be furniture," she muttered to herself, twirling a strand of mousy brown hair around her finger. Her reflection in the mirror above her dresser showed a girl with intelligent green eyes and a smattering of freckles across her nose. But Sarah only saw the imperfections, the awkward posture, the clothes that never quite fit right, the hesitant smile that rarely reached her eyes. The day had been particularly tough. In English class, she'd mustered the courage to answer a question, only to have her voice come out as a barely audible whisper. The teacher had moved on without hearing her, and Sarah had shrunk back into her seat, cheeks burning with embarrassment. Now, as the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah made a decision. She needed to get out, to breathe, to be somewhere that didn't feel like it was closing in on her. Grabbing her worn backpack and a light jacket, she headed downstairs. Her mother's voice drifted from the study. "No, we need those reports by Friday. I don't care what it takes. Make it happen." The clipped, authoritative tone was a far cry from any voice Sarah had ever heard directed at her. Sarah paused at the bottom of the stairs, considering whether to announce her departure. After a moment's hesitation, she simply slipped out the front door. They probably wouldn't notice anyway, she thought. The streets of her suburban neighborhood were quiet as Sarah walked, her sneakers scuffing against the sidewalk. She had a destination in mind, Scoops, the local ice cream shop that had become her refuge over the past year. It was a place where she could blend into the background, nursing a single scoop for hours while she people-watched or lost herself in a book. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah entered Scoops. The familiar scent of waffle cones and sweet cream enveloped her, and she felt some of the day's tension begin to ebb away. "The usual, Sarah," called out Maggie, the elderly owner who seemed to have a sixth sense for her regulars' preferences. Sarah nodded, managing a small smile. "Yes, please." "Thank you, Maggie." With her single scoop of mint chocolate chip, Sarah settled into her favorite corner booth. From here, she had a view of the entire shop and the street beyond. She pulled out a tattered paperback, more for show than any real intent to read. As she absently stirred her slowly melting ice cream, Sarah's attention was drawn to a man sitting a few tables away. He was older, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet confidence. What struck her most was the way he seemed to be aware of his surroundings without being intrusive. Their eyes met briefly, and he offered a gentle smile. Sarah quickly looked away, unused to such direct acknowledgement from strangers. But something about his presence made her feel oddly at ease. Minutes ticked by, and Sarah found herself stealing glances at the man. He seemed to be writing in a small notebook, occasionally looking up as if deep in thought. There was something intriguing about him, a mystery that piqued Sarah's curiosity in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. As the shop began to empty, Sarah realized she'd been there for over an hour. She gathered her things, preparing to head home to a house where her absence had likely gone unnoticed. As she stood, she was surprised to find the man approaching her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I couldn't help but notice you seem to have a lot on your mind. Sometimes a friendly ear can make all the difference. Would you like to talk?" Sarah hesitated, years of caution warring with a desperate need for connection. I don't know," she stammered, clutching her backpack strap. The man's smile widened slightly. "No pressure, but if you'd like, I'll be here again tomorrow. Same time. Sometimes it's easier to open up to a stranger. He placed a folded note on the table. If you decide to come back, this might give us something to talk about. Take care, Sarah. With that, he turned and left the shop, leaving Sarah staring at the note, her heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched the folded note, her mind racing with possibilities. The walk home from Scoops felt different somehow, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. The suburban streets, usually so mundane, now seemed filled with potential secrets and mysteries. As she approached her house, Sarah noticed her parents' cars in the driveway. A fleeting hope that they might have wondered where she'd been was quickly extinguished when she entered to find the living room dark and quiet. Muffled voices from upstairs indicated they were engrossed in their own world, as usual. Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, closing the door softly behind her. She sat on her bed, cross-legged, and stared at the note. Part of her wanted to open it immediately, while another part savored the anticipation, the not knowing. For a moment, she felt like the protagonist in one of her beloved mystery novels. Taking a deep breath, Sarah carefully unfolded the paper. Her brow furrowed as she looked at its contents. Instead of a message or a phone number, she found a series of seemingly random letters and numbers. "What on earth?" Sarah whispered, her confusion mixing with intrigue. She turned the paper over, hoping for some explanation, but the back was blank. For the next hour, Sarah pored over the cryptic message. She tried reading it backward, looking for patterns, even holding it up to a mirror. Nothing made sense. As frustration began to set in, she remembered something from a book she'd read about World War II codebreakers. Grabbing her laptop, Sarah began researching ciphers and codes. She dove into a world of cryptography, learning about Caesar shifts, Vigenère ciphers, and other methods of encoding messages. The more she read, the more fascinated she became. It was like uncovering a hidden language, a secret way of communicating that had existed alongside the ordinary world all along. As the night wore on, Sarah's eyes grew heavy, but her determination didn't waver. She scribbled notes, tried different techniques, and slowly began to see patterns emerging from the chaos of letters. It was nearly midnight when something clicked. Using a simple substitution cipher, where each letter was shifted a certain number of places in the alphabet, Sarah began to decode the message. Her heart raced as words started to form. "You are in danger. Trust no one at home. Find me." Sarah sat back, her mind reeling. The decoded message brought more questions than answers. Danger? Trust no one at home? What did it mean? Who was she supposed to find? A soft knock on her door made Sarah jump. She quickly shoved the note and her scribbled attempts at decoding under her pillow. "Sarah? Are you still awake?" Her mother's voice came through the door, sounding tired and distracted. "Yes, Mom. Just finishing some homework," Sarah called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "All right, don't stay up too late. Good night." "Good night," Sarah replied, listening to her mother's footsteps retreating down the hall. Once she was sure she was alone again, Sarah pulled out the note and stared at the decoded message. The words seemed to pulse on the page, ominous and urgent. She thought about the man at the ice cream shop, his kind eyes and gentle demeanor. How could he be connected to something that sounded so dangerous? Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of elaborate game? A test? Or was there really something sinister happening that she'd been oblivious to all this time? She glanced around her room, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. The familiar posters on the walls, the cluttered desk, the bookshelf filled with her favorite stories. It all felt different now, as if she were looking at it through a veil of suspicion. As the night deepened, Sarah found herself torn between excitement and fear. Part of her thrilled at the idea of being involved in something important, something bigger than her everyday life. But another part whispered cautions, reminding her of all the warnings she'd heard about trusting strangers. Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, the decoded message playing on repeat in her mind. By the time dawn began to creep through her curtains, Sarah had made a decision. She would return to Scoops that afternoon. She needed answers, and the mysterious man was the only one who could provide them. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last thoughts were of codes and ciphers, danger and secrets. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, standing on the threshold of something that could change everything. Little did she know just how profound that change would be. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She felt as if she were living two lives. One, the routine of school and home where she moved like a ghost, and the other, a secret world of codes and hidden messages that consumed her thoughts. She had returned to Scoops the day after decoding the message, her heart pounding with anticipation. But the mysterious man hadn't been there. Sarah had waited for hours, nursing a melting ice cream cone, her eyes darting to the door every time the bell chimed. As closing time approached, Maggie had given her a concerned look. "Everything all right, dear?" the old woman had asked, wiping down the counter. Sarah had managed a weak smile. "Yes, just waiting for someone." Now, 3 days later, Sarah sat at her desk, absently doodling in her notebook, as her history teacher droned on about the Civil War. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail of her encounter with the man, analyzing every word of the decoded message. "Ms. Matthews?" The teacher's voice cut through her reverie. "Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the Battle of Gettysburg?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she fumbled for an answer. Pay attention, Sarah. This will be on the test," the teacher said, turning back to the whiteboard. As the class resumed, Sarah's gaze drifted to the window. The world outside seemed different now, filled with potential secrets and hidden dangers. She found herself studying her classmates, wondering if any of them had ever received mysterious coded messages from strangers. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Sarah gathered her things and made her way through the crowded hallways, her mind still preoccupied. As she approached her locker, she overheard a snippet of conversation between two teachers. "And the police still haven't found any leads," one was saying in a hushed tone. "It's terrifying to think it could happen so close to home," the other replied. Sarah's ears perked up, but before she could hear more, the teachers moved on, their voices lost in the din of students eager to start their weekend. At home, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to her parents' behavior. Every phone call, every hushed conversation, every late night at the office now seemed suspicious. She started noting down their comings and goings, looking for patterns or inconsistencies. One evening, as she sat picking at her dinner, her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "Sarah, did you hear what I said?" She looked up, startled. "Sorry, what?" Her father sighed. "I asked how school was going. You've seemed distracted lately." For a moment, Sarah considered telling them everything, about the man at the ice cream shop, the coded message, her growing fears. But as she looked at her parents, their faces lined with exhaustion from another long day at work, she hesitated. "It's fine," she said instead. "Just busy with assignments." Her mother nodded absently, already checking her phone for emails. "That's good, honey. Keep up the hard work." Sarah excused herself from the table, retreating to her room. She pulled out the decoded message from its hiding place in her desk drawer and read it again. "You are danger. Trust no one at home. Find me." The words seemed to mock her now. Find who? And how could she be in danger in her own home? Her parents might be distant, but surely they wouldn't harm her. Would they? Sarah shook her head, trying to clear the doubts creeping in. She needed more information. She needed to find the man from the ice cream shop. Over the next few days, Sarah developed a routine. After school, she would go to Scoops, hoping to see the mysterious stranger. When he didn't show up, she would wander the nearby streets, looking for any sign of him. She even considered asking Maggie if she knew anything about him, but decided against it, worried about drawing attention to herself. At night, she would lie awake, her mind racing with possibilities. Was she overreacting? Was this all some elaborate prank? Or was there really something sinister going on, something that threatened her safety. The lack of sleep and constant state of alertness began to take its toll. Sarah's grades started to slip, and she found herself jumping at small noises. Her parents, when they noticed, attributed it to typical teenage moodiness. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her usual booth at Scoops, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face through the window. Her heart leaped. It was him. She rushed out of the shop, nearly knocking over a chair in her haste. But by the time she reached the street, the man had disappeared into the crowd. Sarah stood there, breathing heavily, feeling a mix of frustration and relief. He was real. She hadn't imagined him. As she turned to go back into the shop, a small piece of paper on the ground caught her eye. With trembling hands, she picked it up. On it was written a single line. "The truth is closer than you think. Be careful who you trust." Sarah clutched the paper to her chest, her mind whirling. The game, it seemed, was far from over, and she was determined to see it through to the end, no matter where it might lead her. The library had always been a sanctuary for Sarah, a place where she could lose herself in books and escape the loneliness of her life. But today, as she wandered through the stacks, her mind was far from the worlds of fiction she usually sought. It had been a week since she'd glimpsed the mysterious man outside Scoops and found the cryptic note. The words, "The truth is closer than you think. Be careful who you trust," had become a mantra, repeating in her head as she went through the motions of her daily life. Sarah's fingers trailed along the spines of books in the mystery section, her eyes unseeing. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the figure sitting at a table in the far corner of the room. Almost. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. The man from the ice cream shop. He was bent over a book, seemingly engrossed, but as Sarah watched, his eyes flicked up and met hers. There was a flicker of recognition, then a small nod. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached the table. Her palms were sweaty, and she could hear her pulse pounding in her ears. As she got closer, she could see that the book he was reading was Codes and Ciphers, a history of cryptography. "Hello, Sarah," the man said quietly, closing the book. "I was wondering when you'd find me." Sarah slid into the chair across from him, her mouth dry. "Who are you?" she whispered. "What's going on? Am I really in danger?" The man's face softened with concern. "My name is Detective Michael Jameson. I'm an undercover officer, and yes, Sarah, I'm afraid you are in danger. But not from me." Sarah's mind reeled. A detective? She had imagined many scenarios, but this wasn't one of them. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Why me? What's happening?" Detective Jameson leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth." For the next hour, in hushed tones punctuated by the soft sounds of the library around them, Detective Jameson explained the situation. Sarah listened, her world tilting on its axis with each revelation. Her parents, the detective explained, were not who she thought they were. They were involved in a complex web of financial crimes that had ruined lives and implicated powerful, dangerous people. Jameson had been working undercover for years, slowly gathering evidence to bring down the entire operation. "But why involve me?" Sarah asked, her mind struggling to reconcile this new reality with the parents she thought she knew. "Because you're in danger," Jameson replied, his eyes grave. "The people your parents are involved with are getting nervous. They're looking to tie up loose ends, and as their daughter, you're seen as a potential liability." Sarah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. The distance she'd felt from her parents, their long hours and secretive behavior. It all took on a sinister new meaning. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Jameson reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "We need your help, Sarah. There's a ledger in your father's study that contains crucial evidence. Without it, we can't bring down the entire operation." Sarah's mind flashed to the study, a room she'd rarely entered, always feeling like an intruder in that space. "You want me to steal from my parents?" "I know it's a lot to ask," Jameson said, his voice gentle but firm. "But it's not just about your parents anymore. There are innocent people whose lives are at stake." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. For years, she had felt invisible, unimportant. Now, suddenly, she was at the center of something much bigger than herself. "What do I need to do?" she asked, meeting the detective's gaze with newfound determination. Jameson nodded, a mix of relief and concern in his eyes. "I'll give you instructions on how to find the ledger. But Sarah, you must be careful. Act normal. Don't let on that you know anything. Your safety depends on it." As they finalized the details of their plan, Sarah felt a flutter of fear mixed with excitement. This was real. This was happening. And for better or worse, her life would never be the same. As she left the library, the afternoon sun feeling somehow brighter, Sarah squared her shoulders. She had a mission now, a purpose. The invisible girl was about to become the key to unraveling a criminal empire. And despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, Sarah couldn't help but feel alive for the first time in years. The next morning, Sarah woke with a start, her heart racing. For a moment, she thought the events of the previous day had been a dream. But the weight of reality quickly settled in as she remembered Detective Jameson's words and the task that lay ahead. She went through her morning routine mechanically, hyper-aware of every sound in the house. Her parents' voices drifted up from the kitchen, discussing their plans for the day. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself before heading downstairs. "Morning, honey," her mother said, not looking up from her tablet. "There's cereal on the counter." Sarah mumbled a response, pouring herself a bowl. She watched her parents covertly, searching for signs of the people Detective Jameson had described. Her father, engrossed in his phone, looked the same as always, clean-shaven, slightly distracted. Her mother, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails, seemed no different than any other day. "I'll be home late tonight," her father announced, standing up. "Big meeting with the investors." Sarah's ears perked up. Was this meeting part of their illegal activities? She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but Jameson's warning echoed in her mind. Act normal. "Okay, Dad," she said instead, forcing a smile. "Good luck with the meeting." As her parents left for work, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and tension. She had the house to herself, but the weight of her mission pressed down on her. She knew she had to find the ledger, but the thought of searching her father's study filled her with apprehension. Sarah spent the morning going through her usual weekend routine, all the while acutely aware of the ticking clock. By early afternoon, she could no longer delay the inevitable. Taking a deep breath, she approached her father's study. The room was neat and organized, with shelves of books lining the walls and a large oak desk dominating the center. Sarah had rarely entered this space, always feeling like an intruder. Now, as she began her search, that feeling intensified. She started with the obvious places: drawers, filing cabinets, even behind the books on the shelves. Nothing. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's frustration grew. Where could it be? Then she remembered something Detective Jameson had told her. "Look for anything out of place," he had said. "Something that doesn't quite fit." Sarah's eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. Suddenly, she noticed a small discrepancy in the wood paneling behind her father's desk. Heart pounding, she ran her fingers along the edge, feeling for a catch or button. With a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open. Inside was a thick, leather-bound book, the ledger. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled it out. This innocuous-looking book held the key to unraveling her parents' secret life. She hesitated for a moment, torn between the urge to open it and the fear of what she might find. A noise from downstairs made her jump. Footsteps. Someone was home. Panic surged through Sarah. She quickly replaced the ledger, closed the compartment, and straightened up the study. As she slipped out of the room, she heard her mother's voice calling out, "Sarah? "Are you home?" "Yeah, Mom," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just upstairs." Sarah's mind raced as she descended the stairs. She had found the ledger, but now what? How was she supposed to get it to Detective Jameson without arousing suspicion? Her mother was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries. "I thought I'd come home early and make a nice dinner," she said, smiling. "How about helping me?" For a moment, Sarah was struck by the normalcy of the scene. This was her mother, the woman who had raised her, who had taught her to read, who had comforted her after nightmares. How could this same person be involved in something so sinister? "Sure, Mom," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Sarah felt as if she were living in two worlds simultaneously. In one, she was just a teenager helping her mom make dinner. In the other, she was a key player in an undercover operation, holding secrets that could tear her family apart. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's mind churned with questions and doubts. What would happen to her parents when the truth came out? What would happen to her? The weight of her knowledge pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, Sarah felt something else stirring, a sense of purpose, of being part of something important. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a passive observer. She had the power to make a difference, to right wrongs, to seek justice. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the kitchen windows, Sarah made a silent vow. She would see this through no matter the cost. The truth had to come out, and she would be the one to bring it to light. The following days passed in a blur of tension and secrecy for Sarah. Every moment at home felt like walking on eggshells, her newfound knowledge weighing heavily on her conscience. She found herself scrutinizing her parents' every move, searching for signs of their hidden lives. One evening, as Sarah sat at her desk pretending to do homework, she overheard a hushed conversation between her parents in the hallway. "We need to be careful," her father's voice drifted through the partially open door. "They're getting suspicious." "Do you think they know about—" Her mother's reply was cut off as they moved further down the hall. Sarah's heart raced. Were they talking about the authorities? About Detective Jameson? She longed to hear more, but knew she couldn't risk getting caught eavesdropping. The next day at school, Sarah found it nearly impossible to concentrate. Her teachers' voices faded into background noise as her mind churned with plans and worries. During lunch, she sat alone, picking at her food and scanning the cafeteria nervously, half expecting to see Detective Jameson or some other undercover agent watching her. As the final bell rang, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ice cream? 4 p.m. Her pulse quickened. It had to be Jameson. At Scoops, Sarah found the detective already seated in a corner booth, a cup of coffee in front of him. As she slid into the seat across from him, she noticed the lines of worry etched on his face. "Did you find it?" he asked without preamble, his voice low. Sarah nodded, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "It's in a hidden compartment behind my dad's desk, but I couldn't get it out without risking getting caught." Jameson's brow furrowed. "We're running out of time, Sarah. The organization is getting nervous. They're starting to tie up loose ends." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What does that mean?" "It means they might try to relocate certain assets, including people who know too much." Jameson's eyes met hers, conveying the gravity of the situation. Sarah's mind reeled. Were her parents in danger? Was she? "What do we do?" she whispered. "We need that ledger," Jameson said firmly. "It's the key to bringing down the entire operation. Without it, we can't protect anyone. Not you, not your parents, not the countless others affected by their crimes." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Tell me what I need to do." For the next hour, they formulated a plan. Sarah would need to retrieve the ledger the next night when both her parents were scheduled to be out late. Jameson gave her a small, high-resolution camera disguised as a pen to photograph each page. "Remember," Jameson emphasized as they prepared to leave, "act normal. If anyone suspects you know something, it could put you in real danger." As Sarah walked home, her mind buzzed with a mix of fear and determination. The weight of her task pressed down on her, but beneath it all was a growing sense of purpose. She was no longer just a bystander in her own life. She was taking action, fighting for justice. That night, as Sarah lay in bed unable to sleep, she found herself reflecting on the past few weeks. How quickly her world had changed. How suddenly she had been thrust into this web of secrets and danger. Part of her longed for the simplicity of her old life, when her biggest worry was feeling invisible. But another part of her, a part that was growing stronger each day, embraced this new reality. For the first time, she felt truly alive, truly important. She was making a difference even if no one else knew it yet. As dawn broke, Sarah made a silent vow to herself. She would see this through, no matter what. She would uncover the truth, protect the innocent, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to save her family in the process. The next day passed in a haze of anticipation and nerves. Sarah went through the motions of her normal routine, hyper-aware of every interaction with her parents. As evening approached, she watched them prepare to leave, her heart pounding. "We'll be back late, honey," her mother said, pausing at Sarah's door. "Don't wait up," Sarah nodded, managing a smile. "Have a good night, Mom." As the sound of their car faded into the distance, Sarah took a deep breath. It was time. She had a job to do, a mission to complete. With trembling hands but resolute determination, she made her way to her father's study. The house seemed to hold its breath as Sarah carefully opened the hidden compartment and extracted the ledger. As she began photographing the pages, each click of the camera felt like a step towards justice, towards truth. Little did Sarah know that this night would change everything. The secrets hidden within those pages would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family, herself, and the true nature of right and wrong. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully photographed each page of the ledger. The soft click of the camera pen seemed deafening in the silence of her father's study. Every few seconds, she paused, listening intently for any sign that her parents might have returned early. As she progressed through the book, Sarah couldn't help but glance at some of the entries. Rows of numbers, cryptic abbreviations, and unfamiliar names filled the pages. While she didn't understand most of it, the sheer volume of information was staggering. Suddenly, a name caught her eye. Thompson E. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Emily Thompson had been her best friend in elementary school, until Emily's family abruptly moved away without explanation. Sarah had always wondered what happened to them. Before she could dwell on this discovery, headlights swept across the study window. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. Her parents were home early. With lightning speed, Sarah snapped the final few photos, returned the ledger to its hiding place, and straightened the desk. She had just slipped out of the study when she heard the front door open. "Sarah? Are you still up?" her mother called. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sarah walked to the top of the stairs. "Yeah, Mom. Just finishing some homework. How was your evening?" Her mother smiled, but Sarah noticed the tightness around her eyes. "It was fine, sweetie. You should get some sleep. It's late." Sarah nodded and retreated to her room, her mind racing. As she lay in bed, the weight of what she'd done settled over her. She had the evidence now, but at what cost? The image of Emily Thompson's name in that ledger haunted her. The next morning, Sarah sent a coded text to Detective Jameson, confirming that she had the photographs. His reply was swift. "Meet at the library, 4 p.m. The school day crawled by, each minute feeling like an hour. Sarah found it nearly impossible to concentrate on her classes. During lunch, she sat alone, picking at her food and jumping at every sudden noise. When the final bell rang, Sarah practically ran out of the school. She had an hour before her meeting with Jameson, and she knew exactly where she needed to go. The local newspaper office was small, tucked away on a side street. Sarah had never paid much attention to it before, but now she approached it with purpose. Inside, she asked to see their archives. "What year are you looking for, honey?" the elderly clerk asked kindly. 5 years ago, please," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah pored over old newspapers, searching for any mention of the Thompson family. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a small article about a local businessman declaring bankruptcy and leaving town under mysterious circumstances. Sarah's mind whirled as she connected the dots. The Thompsons' sudden departure, her father's ledger, the financial crimes Jameson had mentioned. It all started to form a horrifying picture. At precisely 4 p.m., Sarah slipped into a quiet corner of the library where Detective Jameson was waiting. His face was grim as she handed over the camera pen. "You did well, Sarah," he said softly. "This evidence will be crucial." Sarah took a deep breath. "I saw something in the ledger, a name, Emily Thompson. She was my friend and her family left town suddenly years ago. I think my parents might have had something to do with it." Jameson's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Sarah. This kind of discovery is never easy, but you're doing the right thing. This evidence will help us bring justice to a lot of people who have been hurt." As they discussed the next steps, Sarah felt a mix of emotions churning inside her. There was fear, certainly. Fear of what would happen when the truth came out. Fear for her parents despite everything. But there was also a growing sense of resolve. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as their meeting drew to a close. "We move quickly," Jameson replied. "With this evidence, we can finally take action. But Sarah, I need you to be prepared. Things are going to change, and they're going to change fast." Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I understand." As she left the library, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street, Sarah felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay the life she had always known, comfortable, if lonely. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, but also the chance to right wrongs and bring truth to light. With each step towards home, Sarah's determination grew. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on. She was no longer the invisible girl, lost in the shadows of her parents' lives. She was a force for justice, a keeper of truths, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As she reached her house, Sarah paused, looking at it with new eyes. Tomorrow, everything would change. But for tonight, she had one last evening in the life she had always known. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped inside, ready to play her part in this final act of normalcy. The next morning dawned with an eerie calm. Sarah woke early, her nerves on edge as she listened to the familiar sounds of her parents preparing for work. Every creak of the floorboards, every murmured conversation seemed amplified in her heightened state of awareness. As she made her way downstairs, Sarah struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy. Her mother was at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. "Morning, honey," she said, glancing up. "You're up early." Sarah managed a smile. "Yeah, I've got a big test today." Her father entered the kitchen, adjusting his tie. "That's my girl," he said, ruffling her hair as he passed. "Always on top of things." The casual affection felt like a punch to Sarah's gut. How could they act so normal when their world was about to implode? As her parents left for work, Sarah felt a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Part of her wanted to cry out, to beg them to explain, to make things right. But she held her tongue, knowing that the wheels were already in motion. At school, Sarah moved through her classes in a daze. The chatter of her classmates, the droning of teachers. It all seemed distant and unreal. During lunch, she sat alone in a quiet corner of the library, her untouched sandwich forgotten as she anxiously checked her phone for updates from Detective Jameson. Finally, as the last bell rang, a text came through. "It's happening. Stay calm. Go straight home." Sarah's heart raced as she made her way home. The streets seemed unnaturally quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows that felt ominous rather than peaceful. As she turned onto her street, she saw them, several unmarked cars parked discreetly along the curb. Taking a deep breath, Sarah entered her house. The silence inside was deafening. She had just set her backpack down when there was a firm knock at the door. Detective Jameson stood on the porch, flanked by several other officers. His face was a mask of professionalism, but his eyes held a hint of sympathy as they met Sarah's. "Sarah," he said gently, "it's time. Are you ready?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah watched from the living room window as her parents' cars pulled into the driveway. She saw the moment of realization on their faces as they noticed the officers approaching. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her father's shoulders slumped in defeat. As the officers led her parents away, Sarah felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie rather than her own life unfolding. Detective Jameson stayed with her, explaining in quiet tones what would happen next. "You've done a brave thing, Sarah," he said. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you've helped a lot of people." Sarah nodded numbly. "What about Emily Thompson? And the others?" "We're already reaching out to the families affected," Jameson assured her. "Your evidence is going to help us make things right for a lot of people." As the reality of the situation sank in, Sarah felt a whirlwind of emotions: grief, anger, relief, and a strange sense of freedom. The secrets that had weighed her down were now in the open, for better or worse. In the days that followed, Sarah's world continued to shift and change. She moved in with her aunt, who lived in a neighboring town. The media frenzy around her parents' arrest was intense, but Jameson and his team worked hard to protect Sarah's privacy. Slowly, pieces of the larger picture began to emerge. The financial crimes her parents had been involved in stretched back years, affecting dozens of families. Sarah learned of people who had lost their life savings, their homes, their businesses. The weight of this knowledge was heavy, but it also strengthened her resolve. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her new room, still surrounded by unpacked boxes, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made her breath catch. "Sarah, it's Emily Thompson. I heard what happened. Thank you for being brave. Can we talk?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she typed her reply. Perhaps in the midst of all this chaos, there was a chance for healing, for rebuilding connections long thought lost. As she looked out the window at the unfamiliar street below, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and painful truths. But for the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly present in her own life. The invisible girl was gone. In her place stood a young woman ready to face the future, whatever it might bring. Sarah took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and began to type. It was time to start a new chapter. The weeks following her parents' arrest were a whirlwind for Sarah. Living with her aunt in a new town, she found herself navigating unfamiliar streets and faces, all while grappling with the aftermath of her decision. The media frenzy had died down, but Sarah could still feel curious eyes following her whenever she ventured out. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah sat on a park bench, watching leaves dance in the breeze. She was waiting for Emily Thompson, the friend she had lost years ago. Their first phone call had been emotional and awkward, filled with long pauses and half-finished sentences. But they had agreed to meet to try and make sense of the past together. "Sarah?" a tentative voice called out. Sarah looked up to see a young woman approaching, her red hair catching the sunlight. Emily had grown taller, her freckles more prominent, but her smile was just as Sarah remembered. "Emily," Sarah breathed, standing up. For a moment, they stood there, unsure. Then Emily stepped forward and pulled Sarah into a tight hug. As they sat on the bench, words began to flow. Emily shared her family's story, the sudden bankruptcy, the shame of leaving town in the middle of the night, the years of struggling to rebuild their lives. "When I heard about your parents' arrest," Emily said, her voice soft, "I couldn't believe it, but then I started connecting the dots. It all made sense." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I had no idea." Emily squeezed her hand. "It wasn't your fault, Sarah. You were just a kid like me. But what you did now, that was incredibly brave." As they talked, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Here was someone who understood, who had lived through the other side of her parents' actions. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. There was too much hurt for that, but it was a start. Later that week, Sarah received a call from Detective Jameson. "Sarah, I wanted to update you," he said, his voice serious. "The trial date has been set, and there's something else you should know." Sarah listened as Jameson explained that her parents were considering a plea deal. In exchange for reduced sentences, they would provide information on other members of the financial crime ring. "What does this mean?" Sarah asked, her mind reeling. "It means they're cooperating," Jameson replied. "It could help bring a lot more people to justice. But Sarah, it also means they're acknowledging their guilt." The confirmation hit Sarah hard. Part of her had still clung to the hope that there had been some misunderstanding, some explanation that would make everything okay. Now, that last shred of denial was gone. In the days that followed, Sarah threw herself into her schoolwork and volunteering at a local community center. She found solace in helping others, in being part of something positive. Her aunt, seeing her struggle, suggested she talk to a therapist. "It's not a sign of weakness," her aunt said gently. "It's a way to process everything you've been through." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. In her first session, she found herself pouring out everything: her years of feeling invisible, the shock of discovering her parents' true nature, the guilt and relief that warred within her. "You've been carrying so much," the therapist said, her eyes kind. "It's okay to let some of it go." As the leaves continued to fall and winter approached, Sarah began to feel a shift. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed her. She was learning to live with the complexity of her emotions, to find balance in the midst of upheaval. One evening, as Sarah worked on a school project, her aunt knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression unreadable. Sarah's heart raced as she made her way downstairs. Standing in the living room, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him, was her father. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to see you, to tell you." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I'm sorry for everything." Sarah stood frozen, a storm of emotion swirling within her. This was the moment she had both dreaded and longed for. As she looked at her father, this man she had once adored, then feared, and now barely recognized, she realized that the next few minutes would shape the course of both their futures. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The journey that had begun with a coded message in an ice cream shop was far from over, but she was no longer the same girl who had started it. She was stronger now, more aware, and ready to write her own story. Sarah's conversation with her father that evening was difficult, filled with tears and hard truths. He explained his role in the financial crimes, expressing deep remorse for the lives he had affected, including their own family. While Sarah couldn't forgive him immediately, she appreciated his honesty and the step he had taken towards making amends. In the months that followed, Sarah's life settled into a new rhythm. She excelled in her studies at her new school, finding strength in her experiences. The therapy sessions continued, helping her process her emotions and build resilience. As spring arrived, bringing new life to the world around her, Sarah received news that her parents' trial had concluded. They had indeed taken the plea deal, providing valuable information that led to the arrest of several other key players in the financial crime ring. Their sentences were reduced, but they would still serve significant time. Emily Thompson became a constant in Sarah's life. Their renewed friendship, born from shared pain, blossomed into a source of support and understanding for both of them. Together, they started a support group for other young people affected by financial crimes, creating a safe space for healing and growth. Detective Jameson kept in touch, updating Sarah on the progress of the larger investigation. Thanks to the evidence she had provided and her parents' cooperation, dozens of families were receiving restitution for their losses. The Thompson family was among them, finally able to rebuild their lives with the compensation they received. As her high school graduation approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey of the past year. She had gone from feeling invisible and powerless to becoming a catalyst for justice and change. The pain of her parents' actions would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. On graduation day, Sarah stood tall as she accepted her diploma. In the audience, she saw her aunt beaming with pride, Emily cheering loudly, and even Detective Jameson offering a supportive nod. Her parents weren't there physically, but Sarah had received letters from both of them, expressing their pride in her accomplishments and their hopes for her future. As she prepared to head off to college, Sarah packed away the last reminders of her old life. The coded message that had started it all, now a piece of evidence in a closed case, was replaced by acceptance letters, scholarship awards, and plans for a future in law enforcement or social justice. Sarah's last stop before leaving town was the old ice cream shop where everything had begun. As she sat in her usual booth, savoring a scoop of mint chocolate chip, she thought about the girl she had been and the young woman she had become. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Emily walking in. They shared a smile, no words needed between them. As they sat together, talking about their plans and dreams, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would have its challenges, but Sarah was ready to face them. She had learned that the truth, no matter how difficult, was always worth fighting for. And she knew that she was no longer invisible. She was a force for good, ready to make her mark on the world. As the sun set on this chapter of her life, Sarah stepped out of the ice cream shop, ready to embrace whatever came next. The invisible girl was gone, and in her place stood a young woman full of purpose, strength, and hope for the future. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.